Iran, defiant as Western suspects stand trial following post-election violence. The standoff escalates. How should Western countries deal with Tehran, and what impact on the critical issue of Iranian nuclear activities? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. A trial to show those guilty of trying to bring down a government, or a show trial. The European Union has joined other international voices in condemning the trial of protesters and political reformists in Iran. Several embassy workers and foreign nationals are among those being tried over violent protests that erupted after June's presidential election. But as Bethan Howe reports, this court may be judging more than just the individuals involved.
On trial in Iran. Last week, a number of important Iranian reformists confessed to adding to post-election unrest and violence that rocked the country in June and July. At the weekend, it was the turn of the foreign element to be questioned. In court, Iranian workers from the French and British embassies and a young French teaching assistant. They're accused of crimes varying from rioting to spying, even plotting to overthrow the government. The British government has condemned the court cases.
This is completely unacceptable and directly contradicts the assurances we've been given repeatedly by senior Iranian officials. We deplore these trials and the so-called confessions of prisoners who've been denied their basic human rights.
After the June 12th vote, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was declared the winner. Within hours, thousands had hit the streets in protest, and the opposition leader was demanding the election result be annulled. As clashes between police and protesters escalated, world leaders kept a close eye on the situation.
We are very much, as you've heard me say before, supportive of the people of Iran being able to express their opinions, being able to demonstrate freely and openly and engage in peaceful protest.
We await further details of the alleged abuses, but it remains a signature part of our approach that without fear or favour we do point to human rights abuse wherever it takes place.
Iran's re-elected president called for the rest of the world not to interfere and blamed the West for stirring up unrest.
In these recent elections, the enemy tried to bring the battlefront to the interior.
The Iranian court has heard that many of those arrested during post-election protests have pleaded guilty to their charges, but opponents have accused police and interrogators of forcing confessions, and even, in some cases, of the rape of detainees. Some are calling the court a show trial, with Tehran using the foreign nationals for leverage. At the weekend, 3 American hikers were reportedly transferred to Tehran from the Iraqi border, where they'd been held since straying into Iran at the end of July. Observers have suggested these too may be used as a bargaining chip with the United States. The fate of the defendants themselves is yet to be decided, but what is clear is that it's not only the individuals that are on trial here, but foreign nations' involvement as a whole. Bethan Howe, Inside Story.
Well, joining us now are our guests in Tehran. Syed Mohammed Marandi, he's head of North American Studies at the University of Tehran. And in London, Simon Tisdall, first of all, he's the Assistant Editor of Foreign Affairs at the Guardian newspaper. Also in London, Shahab Musafat, he's a journalist and has spent the last 3 years working for Press TV in Tehran. Mr. Marandi, if I could start with you, do you believe that these embassy workers and the French teaching assistant were involved in some kind of grand Western conspiracy to orchestrate the post-election violence?
Well, I really can't say because it is an ongoing trial. What I have heard is that the judge of this trial is a very respected person. I don't know him personally, and I don't think it would be wise or fair for me to comment either way on the trial itself. I think we'll have to wait and see how it plays out and what sort of verdict these people get. And there are different people who may have different verdicts. Some may be innocent and some may not.
All right, in that case, let me quote to you what Hillary Clinton had to say about what she calls a show trial. She said that this show trial is a sign of weakness, that the Iranian leadership is afraid of their own people and afraid of the truths and the facts coming out. What do you say to that?
Well, I wouldn't see the U.S. Secretary of State as the most credible and objective judge of events in Iran. It is obvious, of course, that the United States and some of its European partners have played a very negative role in Iran in the 30 years of revolution, and also during the recent events. The fact that we have tens of Persian channels, television and radio channels, being beamed in from the United States and Europe, both government-owned and private-owned, but funded by the U.S. government and owned by European countries as well. And they have been constantly trying to destabilize the country, spreading rumors, even inciting violence on many occasions, shows that these countries have been interfering in Iran's internal affairs. And I think that while in the short run, in the short term, they may score some points against Iran, but in the long term, I think that it increases suspicion towards these countries, and therefore it decreases the chance for any real dialogue and rapprochement.
Shahab Mousavat, what do you say to that Iranian view that the arrests and trials are a reasonable action of a leadership trying to defend Iran's best interests, that the actions of Britain and France are trying to destabilize the country?
Well, I think it's highly insulting to both the intelligence of the Iranian people and to their actions over the last 6 or 8 weeks. These are people who are determined to win freedom for themselves, and their actions have spoken about that. And to say that they are led somehow by some scurrilous actors from without is to do them a great disservice. They feel that there was an election process in which they were willing to participate, and having participated, they felt that they didn't get their just desserts and protested that. That is what has led to this sorry pass. And it is not the United States, France, Britain, or any foreign agent that is orchestrating this. That is a great disservice from an Iranian to Iranians.
Simon Tisdall, what's your view? Isn't it true to say that it would be in the West's interest to foment an uprising against the current leadership?
No, I don't think that's true at all, and I don't think that's what the West is trying to do. I think history of authoritarian regimes and weak regimes all around the world shows that when they get into trouble, they project their problems outwards. They try and blame exterior forces for internal problems, and that's what's been happening here. I don't know quite what went on during the election, but the results were hardly credible. And it seems to me the regime has been trying to cover its traces ever since by blaming just about anybody, normally Britain, because Britain is a traditional scapegoat of the Iranian regime. But there's no Western conspiracy here. People in Iran don't have to listen to Voice of America or BBC Persian service. They can make their own choices. As they've shown, they're a very mature, sophisticated and informed electorate, and they know that something seriously went wrong with this election, and they're not satisfied with the answers they've been getting.
So, Said Marandi, what do you say to that? When in trouble, many in Iran are quick to blame external forces. Truth is that the walls are crumbling, so the Islamic Republic is looking for, other people to blame.
Well, again, I think that it's far more complex than that. And I think that obviously people on both sides of the political playing field in Iran have made serious mistakes. Mr. Mousavi has made serious mistakes, and so has Mr. Ahmadinejad. Personally, I don't think that there was anything wrong. Well, I think both of them, they allowed extremist forces on both sides to basically rule the streets for a while, and a lot of ordinary people suffered as a result. I personally think that the election was sound. I didn't vote for Mr. Ahmadinejad, and I am a critic of the administration, but I think that in any case, even if there were serious questions to be raised, it should have been raised in a more reasonable manner, and I think that Mr. Ahmadinejad too was very aggressive and provocative at times. But I think that in general things will calm down. But I do believe that, I don't believe that many people in the reformist camp were foreign agents or anything like that. But I do believe that obviously Western countries do have an interest in destabilizing the state, and I think they have tried to do that in the past. And to say that they would not do such a thing, I think is a bit misleading and a bit simple-minded.
Mr. Mousavi, in London, would you say that things are likely to calm down, or do you think the divisions within the elite mean that things are going to continue spiraling out of control?
Well, I'm absolutely stunned by what Mr. Marandi just said. Professor Marandi on the one hand says that there shouldn't be simplistic analyses made of what has gone on in Iran, yet he makes this most sweeping of simplistic generalizations in that he tries to isolate these forces into two camps. There are no two camps. The Iranian regime has and continues to be in possession of all of the power in the Islamic Republic of Iran. And Mr. Mousavi, it is telling that Mr. Mousavi was chosen by the Guardian Council, one of the most important bodies within the Islamic Republic of Iran. It orchestrated, chose and anointed 4 candidates by itself, and simply asked the people to then stipulate which of those favoured few they wanted to see as their president. The people participated in that most incomplete forms of democracy, but they participated nonetheless. And when they seem to have indicated that Mr. Mousavi may have been their choice, that was taken away from them. I think that it is extremely naive of Mr. Marandi now to sit there and to try and make out there are 2 or 3 oppositional forces inside Iran. Mr. Mousavi is nothing more than someone who was handpicked by the Guardian Council, and for him now to put on new clothes and to put himself forward as some sort of champion for the opposition is a little far-fetched.
So, Mr. Marandi, you're being sweeping and simplistic.
Well, you know, I think when I said simplistic, I wasn't referring to your 2 guests, obviously. I meant I was making a general comment. But no, I disagree. And I think that, again, this is the statement made by your good guest in London is a bit insulting towards Mr. Mousavi as well. I think that the point that I was making was that Western governments obviously have an interest in destabilizing Iran. They have acknowledged that they've had a role to play in events in Iran in different ways. But that doesn't mean that, for example, someone like Mr. Mousavi would necessarily be working with them. I'm just making a general comment that that is something that Western governments would do. And in general, I think that the debate in the United States is really, it is a dangerous debate to continue to attack Iran and to demonize Iran at this time, especially with the situation in the Middle East as it is not very helpful. And I think that the forces of reason in the West will have a more difficult time in bringing about a more, let's say, favorable atmosphere for Western countries. Yes, sorry.
May I interject? I simply wanted to tell the viewers out there that I was in Iran during the election and the lead up to the election. I covered those elections, and I can tell them that so far as the people out there were concerned, they saw Mr. Mousavi very much as a vehicle for their aspirations, not so much as a person in whom they wanted to reside their trust. They saw him as someone that would facilitate a gradual change. Now it seems that the regime in Tehran does not even want incremental change. They want no change. And I think going forward, Iran has, I think, set out its stall that in not wanting change internally, it also doesn't want any change externally in its foreign relations, and has created an atmosphere. And yeah, let me just finish. Has created an atmosphere in which that kind of dialogue, that kind of rapprochement that you spoke of earlier, becomes an impossibility.
Okay, Ms. Marandi, your response to that, and then I want to bring in Simon Tisdall, but please go ahead.
Well, again, I think that the problem with what Simon is saying is that he's creating a monolithic entity out of the Iranian people and saying that the Iranian people didn't like Mr. Mousavi either, or they didn't support him. He didn't represent them. But the fact is that he had major support by those who opposed Mr. Ahmadinejad. Many of them felt very close to what he believed in, and many people, and I think a lot more people, felt the same about Mr. Ahmadinejad. And at the end of the day, Mr. Ahmadinejad is the president of Iran, and Mr. Mousavi is a popular politician among many of those who oppose Mr. Ahmadinejad. And I don't think it's fair to Mr. Mousavi to say that those who supported him didn't really support him. They wanted, let's say, something other than the Islamic Republic, and they just used him as some sort of vehicle. I think that's somewhat unfair to Mr. Mousavi. Okay,
that's fine. Let's bring in Simon Tisdall. So from your perspective as a journalist with an expertise in this area, do you think that the divisions within the elite mean that Mr. Mousavi still may be able to challenge the legitimacy of Mr. Ahmadinejad as president?
Well, I think there certainly are very obvious divisions within the elite, and I don't think they're going to go away. I think they've been there for a long time, by the way. I think they've been there before the election, but now they're out in the public eye. As for questioning the legitimacy, I think that's the presidency, the second term now seems to be set in stone. I notice there's a challenge coming to Ahmadinejad, not from Mousavi particularly, but from the Majlis, where over 200 members have demanded that they be consulted over the formation of a cabinet. That's a challenge from the Conservative side to Ahmadinejad, on top of the challenge that he faces from the opposition. Going back a bit in this conversation, there's a very distorted picture of what's been happening in recent history coming from Tehran today. I mean, since Obama came to office in January, he has gone out of his way to be conciliatory and to open up a dialogue with the government in Iran. It may be that the Bush administration had various covert plots for destabilizing and so on, but since Obama came to power, which, you know, more than 6 months ago now, he's gone out of his way for the unclenched fist and all of that. And to say that somehow that the Western governments were conspiring to destabilize this regime when actually they were trying to start a dialogue with it, and actually the dialogue has now been delayed because of the post-election turmoil. And actually what the West wants to talk about with Iran is principally the nuclear portfolio and regional security issues. It doesn't really want to get into an argument with Iran about how it runs its internal politics. But it's not able to do that now. So this is actually against Western interests. What Britain and the United States and other European allies want to do, as I understand it, is actually engage with this regime after a long period of ostracism and mutual recrimination. And they've been prevented from doing so by the turmoil in Tehran. So if the longer this goes on, the more destabilizing it will be for Iran, but not because of what outside powers are doing, but because of the inability of Iranians to reach a consensus on how they're going to run their politics.
Okay, Mr. Morandi, it's having a completely negative effect and going exactly against the way that Iran should want to go.
Well, again, I would disagree in the sense that Mr. Obama, though some of his rhetoric has been more positive, that's true, he did say that all options are on the table, which is basically a threat to the Iranian people. And at the same time, he has appointed people, such as Dennis Ross and others, who are quite negative towards Iran. So I really think that one shouldn't judge Mr. Obama that easily. I think that there are forces of reason in Washington who do want a more open debate, but I think, or let's say dialogue with Iran, but I don't think that they have the upper hand at the moment. I think that the rhetoric against Iran is very extreme. The country is constantly demonized. On one occasion, I was invited by a Western news channel for a 20-minute interview. 2/3 of what I said was censored, and I was then called the mouthpiece of a repressive regime and so on and so forth. And when one sees that sort of extremist response to someone who gives an independent, an academic who has no official government position and who didn't even vote for Mr. Ahmadinejad, when that sort of demonization occurs, then one can see how difficult it will be for the forces of reason in Washington to
okay, well, you are talking about one TV station. We're certainly not here to censor you here on Al Jazeera. Let me just bring back Mr. Tisdall.
No. In fact, I would like to commend Al Jazeera.
Okay, well, let me bring in Mr. Tisdall. I can sense that you're eager to come back.
I just don't recognise that narrative. I mean, I don't know which neocon think tanks our friend in Tehran's been visiting, but you know, what the administration is saying, as opposed to right-wingers in the States who don't have any power anymore, is that they want a dialogue with Iran. Obama was extremely restrained in what he said when the violence began in Iran after the elections. It was more than a week or so before he actually commented on it, and then it was only to express concern. The administration has actually gone out of the way in its official statements not to appear to be meddling in Iranian internal politics, other than to say it deplored the violence against civilians, which all right-minded people do, surely. I think, yes, there are deep divisions in this regime, and they need to sort them out. And maybe the way to do that is to stop misrepresenting what the West is saying. There's no demonization going on here.
Okay, let me bring in Shahab Mousavi. Shahab Mousavi, what do you say?
What I'm saying is that whilst I agree with some of the points that Simon Tisdale just made there, I also agree with a great deal of what Mr. Marandi had to say. There is a great deal of schizophrenic tendency in Washington, and the line of division tends to be between the State Department and the White House, and it always has been there. It has been there under President Bush, it was there under President Clinton, and I think it's there again now under President Obama. I think that the way that the State Department pulls is often at odds with the direction in which the White House wishes to go. And it is telling that Hillary Clinton and Dennis Ross, to whom Mr. Marandi pointed, are people who are not particularly favourable in their views towards Iran. Having said that, though, I do agree with Simon Tisdale that Washington has gone out of its way, has gone out on a limb, really, not to interject and not to interfere overly in what is a humanitarian crisis that is besetting Iran, and it is a humanitarian crisis. And if Mr. Marandi sits in Tehran and thinks to himself, he'll see that there are people dying on the streets of Tehran, and that is something that cannot, under any circumstances, be seen to be acceptable, whether you take a moderate or a conservative view.
Mr. Marandi, forced confessions, rapes, deaths, show trials, it's not the sort of thing that the forward-thinking Iranian country or Iranian people will want to see?
Well, again, these are accusations. All sorts of accusations are being made by all sorts of people on the different, from different political parties against one another.
No, Mr. Marandi.
Some are saying that other people are...
I saw someone killed in front of me.
If I could just continue.
Mr. Marandi, I actually witnessed the death. I was imprisoned for 11 days. Mr. Marandi, you're not going to tell me that prima faciu evidence that I'm presenting with you here is by the by. Were you in prison,
I didn't interrupt you.
Were you in prison?
Mr. Marandi, if you just let Mr. Musavat have his say, and then I'll come straight back to you.
Sure.
Prima facie evidence that I'm setting here before you, Mr. Marandi, of a lot of abuse that has gone on inside the so-called justice system of Iran. Are you really an apologist for that? Do you really not accept that that a lot of misdemeanors and crimes have taken place inside Karizak prison? That was closed not just because there was a virus there, but actually because deaths were being perpetrated there. What do you say about the 3 prison warders who have been arrested and charged for their actions there?
Okay, we're going to run out of time very soon, so Mr. Marandi, please answer those suggestions,
well, again,
those allegations.
I can't comment on the accusations that your good guest in London made, but what I can say is that the fact that the leader has come down hard on those people who've committed abuses is very courageous of him, and I think that all people on all sides who've gone too far have to be dealt with. In general, though, I think that the important point is that when you have chaos, then accountability turns to zero. But I think that the main issue here is that in Iran, despite all the problems that we've had over the past few weeks in this country and problems created by politicians on both sides, the fact that we continue to have a political debate being carried out by politicians who oppose each other, and we have newspapers that are opposed to the government and newspapers which are constantly attacking each other, is a positive point. And I think the number of people in all who've been killed, including the nine policemen and ordinary people and the protesters and rioters put together, do not equal one single bombing campaign by the Americans in Afghanistan when they bomb weddings and other ordinary people. So I think that the Americans should worry more about what they're doing in the region and what the Israelis are doing than what the Iranians are doing.
All right, yeah, we've heard your view. We've had some very different views from London. It's been a vigorous debate, gentlemen, but we're right out of time now. Thanks very much indeed. Saeed Mohammed Marandi, Shahab Musavat, Simon Tisdale, thanks very much indeed. And thank you for watching this edition of Inside Story. We're always keen, of course, to get your thoughts and your suggestions. Very keen to hear from you. Just email any ideas to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Nick Clark, it's goodbye.